What did Archangel Michael do to the wives of the fallen angels? It's a question that sounds like the beginning of a dark fairy tale, a rumor whispered in the hidden corners of theology. Legends have spun fantastic tales of a terrible punishment, a divine wrath so severe that these women were transformed into monstrous sirens, cursed to lure men to their doom for eternity. It's a shocking story, but is it true? Tonight, we put the legends on trial. We will investigate what really happened to the wives of fallen angels, the human women who stood at the epicenter of a cosmic catastrophe. We will open the ancient texts, not to retell a myth, but to uncover the evidence. Our investigation will reveal a hidden truth beyond the Sirens myth, a fate far more tragic and a legacy far more terrifying than any story of mermaids or monsters. The truth is not about a fantastical transformation. It is about a horrifying reality of death, judgment, and the birth of a spiritual plague that continues to haunt humanity to this day. The secret is not what Michael did to them, but what became of their children. Before we can uncover the truth, we must first dismantle the fiction. The myth of the fallen angels' wives becoming sirens is a powerful and enduring one. It's a story of tragic, poetic justice. But our mission as spiritual archaeologists is not to be seduced by beautiful stories. It is to follow the evidence. And when we apply forensic analysis to this myth, it collapses under the weight of historical fact. Our investigation must begin with the source. The sirens themselves do not originate in Hebrew scripture or lore. Their birthplace is the world of ancient Greek mythology. In Homer's Odyssey, they are enchanting creatures, originally depicted as half-woman, half-bird, whose irresistible songs lured sailors to their deaths on rocky shores. Later traditions transformed them into the mermaids we recognize today. Their story is a powerful pagan myth about the dangers of temptation, but it has no historical connection to the events described in the Book of Enoch or Genesis. More importantly for our case, the primary texts are silent. The Book of Enoch, our most detailed eyewitness account of the Watcher's sin, contains no mention of this transformation. It speaks at length about the punishment of the fallen angels, who were bound in darkness. It describes the destruction of their giant children. But of the wives being turned into sea creatures, there is not a single word. And the Bible itself offers the most definitive refutation. Genesis is clear and absolute on the matter of the flood's survivors. Every living thing on the face of the earth that was not on the ark was wiped out. There were no secret exceptions. There were no cursed women left to haunt the newly cleansed seas. The conclusion is inescapable. The Sirens myth is a later invention, a fascinating and creative attempt to blend Greek mythology with biblical lore, a kind of ancient fan fiction. It is not history. It is a beautiful and tragic distraction from the much darker and more grounded truth of what really happened. So, if they did not become sirens, what was their true role? To understand their fate, we must first understand their crime. Were they innocent victims dragged into a cosmic war, or were they willing accomplices? The answer to that question is the key to everything. The Sirens Myth, though false, attempts to answer a critical question. Were the wives of the fallen angels punished? And to answer that, we must first determine what, if any, was their crime. This is the heart of our investigation. Were these women helpless victims, casualties of a cosmic war they did not understand? Or were they willing accomplices, seduced by power and beauty into a treasonous alliance? The ancient texts present a complex and seemingly contradictory case file, suggesting the truth is not a simple answer. The first piece of evidence, from Genesis chapter 6, strongly supports the argument that they were victims. The text uses a forceful and unsettling verb. It says, "The sons of God took wives for themselves." This is the language of conquest, not courtship. In the deeply patriarchal world of antiquity, where women were often treated as property, this single word suggests a profound lack of choice. It paints a picture of divine beings, possessing unimaginable power and charisma, simply taking what they wanted, with human women having little to no ability to resist. In this light, they were the first casualties of the Watchers' lust, not their co-conspirators. However, the Book of Enoch introduces a layer of complexity that we cannot ignore. While it confirms the initial transgression, it also details the curriculum of forbidden knowledge that the Watchers taught. And it specifies that certain arts, the secrets of charms, enchantments, and cosmetics, were taught directly to the women. This implies something more than just a passive relationship. It suggests an exchange. It suggests that at least some of these women were not just captives, but students. They were active participants in the new, dark culture being established. They were drawn in by the promise of power, of beauty, of a status far beyond that of a normal human woman. Seduced not just by the angelic beings themselves, but by the forbidden secrets they offered. So, what is the verdict? Victim or accomplice? The evidence suggests both. It is likely that the reality was a spectrum. Some women were undoubtedly taken against their will, tragic victims of a divine crime. Others, however, may have been willing, even eager participants, drawn in by the allure of the supernatural. This complex reality, this mixture of innocence and guilt, is crucial to understanding the different fates that awaited them. The role of the women may have been a complex spectrum of coercion and choice, but the divine judgment that followed was absolute and indiscriminate. So, what really happened to the vast majority of the wives of the fallen angels, both the victims and the accomplices? If they did not become sirens, what was their true fate? The Bible, in this matter, leaves no room for myth or speculation. It delivers a verdict that is as stark as it is terrifying. They died. Let us be perfectly clear. The entire purpose of the Great Flood, as we have established in our previous investigations, was a radical act of genetic and spiritual cleansing. It was a divine reset button, designed to wipe the slate of a world that had become irredeemably corrupted by the Nephilim contagion. And the instrument of this cleansing was absolute. Genesis chapter 7, verse 23, is one of the most brutal and comprehensive statements in all of Scripture. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds in the sky were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. There are no asterisks. There are no exceptions. There are no footnotes about a handful of cursed women surviving in the sea. The word is every. The only human survivors were the 8 souls aboard the ark. This means that the women who had lain with angels, the mothers of the giants, shared the same fate as their monstrous children and the rest of corrupt humanity. They were consumed by the waters. They drowned in the very judgment that their unholy unions had helped to unleash upon the world. This is a grim and unsentimental truth. There was no magical transformation, no poetic curse that turned them into mythical sea creatures. There was only the cold, hard reality of divine judgment. Their physical story ends here, beneath the waves of the deluge, their bodies buried alongside their giant sons in the sediment of a drowned world. This fact is critical, because understanding their physical end is the only way to comprehend their far more horrifying spiritual legacy. The story was not over. It had only changed dimensions. Their bodies were destroyed in the flood. The historical record of their lives was erased from Genesis. This should have been the end of their story. But it wasn't. Because the most terrifying consequence of their actions was not physical. It was spiritual. And it is a legacy that is still with us to this day. This brings us to the true hidden fate of the wives of the fallen angels, a truth far more disturbing than any myth about sirens. Their ultimate legacy is not found in what they became. It is found in what their children became after death. As we have declassified in our previous investigation into the Book of Enoch, the spirits of the dead Nephilim did not find rest. Because they were a profane mixture of spiritual and material, they could not ascend to heaven, nor could they descend to the place of the dead. Their spirits were trapped, bound to the earth, cursed to wander as homeless, malevolent entities. These, Enoch reveals, are the evil spirits, the demons. Now, connect the dots. Who gave birth to the Nephilim, the very beings whose souls would become the demonic plague upon humanity? The wives of the fallen angels. This is their true, horrifying legacy. This is the hidden truth beyond the Sirens myth. Their ultimate fate was not to become mythical creatures that lure sailors. Their fate was to become, in a very real sense, the mothers of demons, the children they bore. The giants who walked the earth were merely the first stage of the infection. The second, and far more enduring stage, began after the flood. Every demon that was cast out by Jesus, every unclean spirit that the apostles battled, every tormenting, possessing entity that has plagued humanity for millennia is, according to this ancient text, the spiritual echo of that first forbidden union. This is a truth of staggering implication. It means that the consequence of the women's choices was not a curse upon themselves, but a curse upon all future generations. They did not become the monsters. They gave birth to the spirits that would fuel the entire demonic kingdom for the rest of human history. This is a fate far darker, and a legacy far more terrifying than any Greek myth could ever imagine. The horrifying legacy of the mothers is now clear. They birthed the giants whose spirits became the demonic plague. So, where does Archangel Michael fit into this story? The thumbnail asks the question that the myth of the sirens created. What did Michael do to the wives of the fallen angels? The answer, once we clear away the fiction, will stun you, but not in the way you expect. What did Michael do to the wives? Absolutely nothing. The ancient texts are unanimous on this point. The judgment upon the human women and all of corrupt humanity came from God himself through the waters of the Great Flood. Michael's role in this cosmic drama was not to punish mortal women. His assignment was far greater, far more dangerous, and directed at a much higher class of enemy. To find Michael's true mission, we must return to the Book of Enoch. When the cries of a terrorized humanity finally reached the throne of God, a command was issued. God summoned his 4 great archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, and gave them each a specific, strategic target. And it was Michael who received the most critical task of all. He was not sent to the daughters of men. He was sent to confront their celestial seducers. Enoch. Chapter 10 records God's command to Michael. Go, bind Semjasa and his associates who have united themselves with women so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. Bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment. This is the stunning truth. Michael's role was not that of a punisher of human victims. It was that of a divine jailer for angelic criminals. He was the commander of the celestial special forces, the one tasked with hunting down, capturing, and imprisoning the very leaders of the rebellion. His battle was not with flesh and blood, but with the principalities and powers who had orchestrated the entire catastrophe. The myth of Michael punishing the wives is a complete reversal of the truth. He was not their adversary. He was, in a cosmic sense, their avenger. His actions were directed solely at the fallen angels who had caused all the suffering. This clarifies his role perfectly. Michael is not a tormentor of the weak. He is the enforcer of divine justice against the powerful. And his true, terrifying work was not done on the surface of the earth, but in the spiritual realm, where he bound the fallen kings in chains of darkness. Our investigation has now established 2 critical facts. The wives of the fallen angels did not become sirens. And Michael's mission was to imprison the angels, not to punish the women. This leaves us with one final, fascinating cold case. If the Sirens myth is not historically true, where did it come from? Why was this specific fantastical story invented and attached to this biblical event? The answer is a classic case of syncretism. The blending of different religious and mythological traditions. It is what happens when one culture tries to make sense of another's story using its own symbols and legends. The story of the Watcher's Wives is a Hebrew story, steeped in Jewish theology and angelology. The story of the Sirens is a Greek myth, born from a culture that saw the sea as a place of both beauty and monstrous danger. Sometime in the centuries after Christ, as these two powerful cultures mingled in the ancient world, a creative and symbolic connection was made. Let's examine the common elements. Both stories involve women associated with a great transgression. Both involve the sea as a place of judgment or curse. The Great Flood on one hand, the deadly shores of the Sirens Island on the other. And both stories involve a sense of dangerous, supernatural seduction. It is likely that later storytellers, familiar with both traditions, saw these parallels and wove them together. They took the unnamed cursed women from the Genesis narrative and gave them a familiar, monstrous form from Greek mythology. It was a way to make the abstract horror of the biblical story more tangible, more visceral. This blending of myths happens throughout history. The Greek gods were mapped onto the Roman gods. Pagan holidays were absorbed into Christian traditions. The creation of the Sirens myth was not an act of deliberate deception. It was a natural creative process of storytelling, an attempt to explain one mystery by linking it to another. But for us, as spiritual archaeologists, it is a crucial lesson. It teaches us that to find the hidden truth, we must be willing to peel back the layers of myth and poetry that have accumulated over the centuries. The story of the Sirens is a beautiful, tragic, and powerful myth. But it is not the truth. The truth, as we have discovered, is far more grounded, far more theological, and in its own way, far more terrifying. So, we have debunked the myth. The wives of the fallen angels did not become sirens. Their true fate was death in the flood, and their true legacy was to become the mothers of the beings whose spirits would form the demonic realm. This leads to our final question of accusation. Why was this truth hidden? Why did the poetic but false myth of the Sirens gain more traction in popular imagination than the stark, theological truth recorded in the apocryphal texts? The answer is that the true story is profoundly uncomfortable. It raises difficult questions that the simplified narratives of popular religion are often unwilling to confront. First, the truth is messy. The story of the Sirens is a neat, contained tragedy with a clear, poetic punishment. The true story of human women dying in a global cataclysm while the spirits of their children are unleashed as a perpetual plague is chaotic. It doesn't have a clean ending. It is a story of an ongoing war, and that is a far more difficult and demanding reality to accept. Second, the truth raises questions of culpability. As we investigated, the role of the women was a complex spectrum of victimhood and complicity. To declare that they all died in the flood feels like a harsh, indiscriminate judgment, especially for those who may have been victims of coercion. It is psychologically easier to imagine them being transformed, to be given a new, albeit cursed, existence, than to confront the brutal finality of their deaths. And finally, and most importantly, the true legacy, the origin of demons, is a theological bombshell. To accept that the demons Jesus confronted were the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim is to accept the Book of Enoch as a vital source of theological information. For many religious institutions, this is a line they are unwilling to cross. It is safer to leave the origin of demons as an undefined mystery than to open the door to texts that exist outside the established canon. And so, the hidden truth remained hidden. It was easier to let the poetic myth of the sirens fill the vacuum. It was a simpler, more romantic, and theologically less complicated story. It transformed a gritty, terrifying account of sin, judgment, and spiritual warfare into a haunting fairy tale. But for those who seek the full story, the fairy tales are never enough. Our investigation tonight has focused exclusively on the human wives of the fallen angels, the daughters of men. We have debunked the myth of their transformation and uncovered their true, tragic fate. But in focusing on these first mothers, we have only scratched the surface of a much deeper, more profound mystery. We have only investigated the story of the human women who birthed the giants. We have not yet asked the most forbidden question of all. Who were the wives of the giants themselves? As we have declassified in our previous investigations, the Book of Enoch, and a simple understanding of biology make it clear that the unholy unions produced both giant sons and giant daughters. These were the Giantesses, a generation of hybrid women who were not victims, but inheritors of a cursed power. These were the true Nephilim queens. This is the next layer of the hidden history. A story not of human tragedy, but of monstrous matriarchal power. A story of cursed queens who ruled dark dynasties, who perfected the forbidden arts taught by their angelic grandfathers, and who may be the true historical figures behind the most terrifying goddesses of ancient mythology. The story of the human wives is one of transgression and judgment. But the story of the giantess queens is one of empire, of magic, and of a civilization so powerful and so corrupt that it had to be completely and utterly erased from history. What Michael did to the wives of the fallen angels was nothing, because their role, while tragic, was a prelude. The real story, the one that explains the true depth of the antediluvian corruption, lies with their powerful, terrifying daughters. And that is a declassified file we will have to open another time. Our investigation tonight has focused on the first tragic generation of mothers, the human wives of the fallen angels. We have debunked the myths surrounding them and uncovered their true, horrifying legacy. But in doing so, we have opened the door to an even deeper and more forbidden layer of this mystery. We have answered the question of the first mothers, but that only leads to the next logical question. Who were the mothers of the second generation of giants? The Book of Enoch and the ancient traditions do not describe a one-off event. They describe the birth of a new, self-sustaining race. For the Nephilim to become a civilization, for them to establish the dynasties and kingdoms that terrorized the ancient world, they needed to procreate. And as we have established, the biological paradox makes it highly unlikely that they continued to take human wives. This is where our investigation introduces a concept we have explored in detail before. A truth so profound it deserves its own file. The existence of the Giantesses, the Nephilim queens. These were the female offspring of the original unholy union, beings who were not human victims, but were born into corruption, inheriting the celestial power of their fathers and the occult knowledge of their mothers. They were the true matriarchs of the Nephilim world. Their story is not one of tragic victimhood, but of terrifying power. They were the queens who ruled alongside their giant brothers, the priestesses who perfected the dark arts, and the mothers who birthed an even purer, more potent strain of the Nephilim race. Their history is the forbidden story of the cursed queens, the very beings whose deified memories may have become the warrior goddesses of ancient paganism. We will not delve into their full story tonight, for their legacy of power, magic, and dynastic intrigue is a tale unto itself. But it is crucial to introduce them here to complete the picture. The story of the Mothers of the Giants is a two-part saga. It begins with the tragic story of human women who became the mothers of monsters. But it culminates in the terrifying story of their monstrous daughters, who rose to become the mothers of an empire. The story of the Nephilim queens is a tantalizing glimpse into a deeper layer of this forbidden history. But the most immediate, most relevant, and most terrifying legacy of the first mothers of the giants is the one we are still fighting every single day. It is the legacy of their children's spirits. Let us be clear, the revelation from the Book of Enoch that demons are the disembodied souls of the dead Nephilim is not just a piece of theological trivia. It is the single most critical piece of intelligence for understanding the nature of spiritual warfare. It is the declassified file on the enemy. For centuries, without this context, humanity has been fighting a shadow war. We wrestle with unclean spirits, demonic forces, principalities and powers, often without a clear understanding of their origin or motive. But now, the picture is complete. When the New Testament describes a demon-possessed man, breaking chains and living among the tombs, we are not just seeing a random act of spiritual chaos. We are seeing the ancient, violent, and untamable spirit of a dead giant, still raging against the world. When we see the parasitic nature of demonic possession, the desperate need for a spirit to inhabit a physical body, we are witnessing the eternal homelessness of the Nephilim souls, forever craving the flesh they lost in the flood. And when we experience the relentless, tormenting nature of temptation, the whispers of pride, of lust, of violence, we are not just fighting our own internal weaknesses. We are engaged in a conflict with the very same spiritual entities whose fathers were the fallen angels, and whose mothers were the first cursed women. This is the true legacy of the wives of the fallen angels. Not a myth of beautiful but deadly sirens singing in the sea, but a horrifying global reality of billions of disembodied malignant spirits waging an unending war against the children of Adam. Their story did not end in the flood. It simply became invisible. And the battle they helped to start is a battle that every single one of us is still fighting today, whether we realize it or not. The story of the wives of the fallen angels, in its rawest form, is a brutal and unflinching lesson in the eternal law of choice and consequence. Whether they were coerced victims or willing accomplices, the path they walked began with a single, foundational choice: to align themselves with a celestial power that was not God. They chose the allure of the supernatural, the charisma of the fallen, the promise of a life beyond the ordinary. They chose to step outside of the divine order. And the consequences were catastrophic, not just for themselves, but for all of creation. Their choice led to the birth of monsters. Their choice unleashed a demonic plague upon the earth. This story is not an indictment of women. It is a timeless allegory for all of humanity. It is the story of the human heart. Constantly faced with a choice between two sources of power. On one side, there is the power offered by the fallen realm. It is the power of self-exaltation, of forbidden knowledge, of bending reality to our own will. It is seductive, it feels liberating, and it always, inevitably, leads to enslavement and destruction. The wives of the Watchers are the ultimate tragic symbol of this path. But the Bible presents a radical alternative. Another story of a woman and a celestial visitor. A story that acts as the divine reversal of the entire Nephilim catastrophe. Thousands of years later, another young woman, Mary of Nazareth, was visited by an angel. This angel, Gabriel, was not a rebel. He was a loyal messenger. He did not come to take, but to ask. He presented her with a choice, an invitation to participate in God's plan. And her response was the polar opposite of the choice made by the women of Genesis. Faced with a supernatural intervention that would change her life forever, she did not choose pride or power. She chose submission. She chose humility. She chose alignment with the will of God. "Behold," she said, "the handmaiden of the Lord. Be it unto me according to your word." And what was the consequence of her choice? She did not give birth to giants who brought death. She gave birth to the Savior who would bring eternal life. She did not unleash a plague of demons. She unleashed the hope of redemption for all mankind. These are the two paths, the two choices. The legacy of the first mothers is a warning. The legacy of the second is an invitation. Tonight, our investigation has taken us on a difficult journey. We began with a question from the thumbnail. What did Michael do to the wives of fallen angels? We debunked the popular myth of the sirens. revealing it as a later invention. We delved into the complex role of these women, separating victims from accomplices, and ultimately we uncovered their true, horrifying fate. Not a magical transformation, but a physical death in the flood, and a spiritual legacy as the mothers of the demonic spirits that still plague our world. This is the hidden truth beyond the Sirens myth. It is a story far grittier, far more tragic, and infinitely more relevant to our spiritual lives than any fairy tale. The question was never what Michael did to them. The real story is what their choice unleashed upon us all. You are no longer bound by the enchanting but false narrative of the sirens. You are now armed with the declassified truth, extracted from the very texts that the ancient world studied. You understand the origin of the demonic realm and the true nature of the spiritual war you are in. This is the core mission of our channel: to cut through the myths, to excavate the evidence, and to present you with the unvarnished, forbidden history that lies buried beneath the surface. If you believe that seeking this level of truth is essential, then we invite you to join our fellowship of spiritual archaeologists. Subscribe to this channel, share this investigation, and help free others from the grip of myth. And now, we turn the final question over to you. In the comments below, tell us, which revelation was more stunning to you? The debunking of the Sirens myth, or the discovery of the true demonic legacy of the wives of the fallen angels? The stories may be beautiful, but the truth is always more powerful.